As far as I can tell, there is very little by way of diversity of thought on that panel. And if the president's not getting good advice, he's not likely to make the right decisions going forward.
President Cyril Ramaphosa wants to intensify BEE, but has BEE worked in the way that it was intended? And who is it serving? Well, joining me to discuss is Gabriel Crouse of the IRR. So Gabriel, you've had a busy week. On Wednesday, you were at the Union buildings submitting a petition to the Office of the President. What did you argue in this submission?
Basically, we said that the Minister of Employment and Labour, Thulas Nxesi, has called for more aggressive BEE, but we need the opposite. In order to deliver on this promise, Parliament has passed a bill called the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, and that's now sitting on Ramaphosa's desk. And the moment he signs it, that means Minister Nxesi has the power to set race quotas across the private sector. On a subsectoral and sub-regional level, it's hugely discretionary. At every level of employment, the minister can say, this is how many people you need of this race and gender, of that race and gender, and so on down the line. This is the first major effect of the EEB, to take public sector style quotas and impose them on the private sector. The second effect is to disqualify businesses from bidding for government tenders, which make up about approaching R1 trillion per annum on the basis of race. And the third is to make employers second guess their staff's racial self-identification. So on the EEB, if an employer fails to test by some pencil test, which is not explained, what their staff's actual race is, the employer could be fined millions of rands. In fact, the highest fine is 2.7 million rand for a multiple offense, or 10% of annual turnover, whichever is greater, which in our calculations would make this basically a bankruptcy fine for most businesses.
All right, so Gabriel, this week we saw the president writing in his newsletter that we are essentially needing to double down on BEE. He's also appointed this triple BEE advisory council, which he says is very representative and inclusive. Doesn't seem very diverse to me in terms of the attitudes towards BEE itself. It seems like many of the appointees there are very much beneficiaries of the current system, which tends to concentrate power and influence in the hands of a small elite. So Gabriel, what is your view on this new advisory council?
Well, it is a clear sign that BEE is more unpopular than ever before. If you look at a grassroots level, the Institute of Race Relations has often found that BEE is far less beloved than political leadership make it out to be. For example, we asked in a 2020 survey, would you personally be more likely to benefit from BEE or a voucher-based system which decentralizes procurement on housing, health, and education? And about 3/4 of Black respondents said they'd prefer the latter voucher system, or they would be more likely to benefit from the voucher system than from BEE. So the grassroots has been one thing, but at the level of South Africa's media big hitters, political big hitters, favor has always been for BEE, and it has very seldom been questioned. Until recently, when economic conditions have become so dire that it has become all but impossible to pretend in any way that BEE is still working. In fact, Zwelinzima Vavi, the head of SAFTU, recently was reported as saying BEE never could have worked, and that really all it did was enrich an elite while the majority languish in poverty. It's against this kind of criticism that Ramaphosa tries to surround himself, shield himself with an advisory council, with, as far as I can tell, people who are likely to also fiercely criticize BEE and say, well, this hardly ever works. Ramaphosa basically says the same thing himself in his letter at a certain point in it. But then to say that the solution is more BEE. The policy hasn't worked yet, so let's try harder. That seems to be the main argument for it. Now, I personally put out a statement. The IRR suggested that the president include someone in the council that is willing to criticize BEE and offer a credible alternative that will genuinely offer non-racial economic empowerment for the disadvantaged. EED being an established policy of the IRR. Effectively, I was trying to nominate myself into the president's council. I was not admitted, which I think is unfortunate, not on a personal basis, but on the basis of diversity of thought. As far as I can tell, there is very little by way of diversity of thought on that panel. And if the president's not getting good advice, he's not likely to make the right decisions going forward.
Right. So now, Gabriel, of course, this takes place against the backdrop of our chronic unemployment problem. And this week, you also hosted a webinar on behalf of the IRR where you outlined some of the causes and the effects of this ongoing unemployment crisis. And Stats SA released some new data this week as well. What is the situation there? Are we likely to see any kind of easing of our unemployment problem in the near future?
David, it's not looking good. I think a lot of news channels have picked up on the fact that there was a slight easing in the overall unemployment figures. But if you drill down and look at those who are not in employment, education, or training, youth between 15 and 34, that number has gone up from about 44% to 46%. And in particular, if you look at those between 24 and 34, over 50%, significantly over 50% are not in employment, education, or training. That is what should be the most dynamic and energetic and upwardly mobile part of the labor force, left to languish under the current policies. We identified in our report education as a long-standing basic problem. We have the world's worst public education system on a bang-for-buck basis. That's no good. Secondly, we identified the national minimum wage, which relative to the median wage is basically the highest on earth in South Africa that any government is trying to enforce. That is hugely alienating to employers that are looking to take on new staff. And in a situation where, roughly just under 2 million people were laid off or let go of during the pandemic, that puts those people trying to get back into work together with the younger people trying to join the workforce in the worst possible position. Add to that the EEB, the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, which will chase away money, chase away jobs, disincentivize merit-based appointment, incentivized crony capitalism, not because of who it appoints, but because of how it appoints. And you find a gloomy picture for the South African economy, but specifically for those lower down on the income scale who are looking to get into work.
And I think what this conversation illustrates, Gabriel, is that we need to connect the dots here, that the president and others complain about endemic poverty and rising unemployment, but they don't see the causal link there between their own policies and those negative effects.
I think that's right. I think that in some sense, for our leaders to connect the dots is going to require ordinary South Africans to connect the dots. So I was delighted by the fact that we had over 23,000 South Africans sign on to our petition to the president to stop EEB, a racially very diverse group of people, a group of South Africans who understand the connection between policy that pretends or on its face claims that it's going to have an effect and the reality, which is exactly the opposite. It promises to help and really it just hurts. We need more South Africans, I think, to understand that connection and apply the pressure that comes out of that understanding just naturally onto political leaders. I'll say one last thing about this kind of pressure. We saw at the start of the week a promise or a threat really to increase the fuel levy all the way back to its regular levels. And civil society and political parties stood up, made a noise about that. The IRR was in that group, widely reported. And the result was not perfect. We did not see the fuel levy completely removed in a sustainable and affordable way. But we did see some relief get extended. We did see a little bit of government discipline. And I think we need to learn from those lessons, also connect the dots between public pressure and policy movement in the right direction.
Gabriel Crouse, thank you very much. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Do you think that Cyril Ramaphosa is right to double down on BEE? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.